Matthew, can you set me out your credentials? Who are you? What do you do? Where do you come from? Why are you able to speak about this issue with any competence?
Sure. I'm an astroparticle physicist, specifically an experimental one. So that means I'm not a theoretical physicist. So I'm really a nuts and bolts physicist, scientist. I'm currently an associate professor of physics at the University at Albany SUNY, State University of New York System. And my alma mater is University of Chicago, which is an institution well known for physics and for churning out really good scientists.
Now, why are you interested? Why is a scientist like you interested in the phenomenon of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena?
I'm interested because I like solving mysteries. The main physics that I work on is dark matter, which is a different mystery, but one that's accepted by mainstream science. And I think of UFOs or UAPs as another mystery, and I think it's a mystery that's worth pursuing and solving, and doing so using the tools of the scientific method.
Okay, so what conclusions broadly have you reached from your own work that you've been doing into the UAP issue?
A broad conclusion that I've come to already is that the phenomenon is worth studying, whatever it is. I don't think it's possible, I haven't been able to conclude yet conclusively that we're talking about one specific thing, be it, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, any of the famous hypotheses. I'm not ready to say that there's a solid conclusion for any of them, but I am able to say personally, from looking at things, I can conclude that it's at least something happening, something interesting, and something worth studying, something that PhD scientists and engineers should study.
Could we just get a few methods resolved off the top? Carl Sagan famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which sounds good, but is it true? Under the scientific method, in order to prove a phenomenon that is anomalous, do we need any more proof than we normally need in the scientific method?
That's a really good question, and I'm of the opinion that we don't. I feel that that statement by Carl Sagan is a beautiful statement, but I feel like it's been used as a cudgel to bludgeon people, and to not allow people to look at the evidence. I think the problem with that statement is the word extraordinary is a word. It's not mathematical. It's not a statistical statement. I think that we are not quantifying what extraordinary evidence is. And part of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you don't give money and funding and you don't allow scientists to look at something, they're never going to get any kind of evidence, let alone extraordinary. So it kind of turns into like an oxymoronic circle where you're not allowed to study something because there's no extraordinary evidence. How do you get the extraordinary evidence? By funding to be allowed to study it.
There's an enormous amount of ridicule, stigma, taboo attached to the UAP subject. Why?
I think that if we look at the history of science, there's nothing new about that. Meteorites, germs, atoms, all had stigma and taboo. And the reason is because we always think we've already solved everything. And we as a species have this hubris where we think there's no new science and there's no new engineering. This has happened before. In the 1890s, famous scientists said, we're done. And then all of a sudden comes relativity and quantum mechanics. At one point, the US Patent Office, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or really happened, said, oh, we might as well close the patent office because there are no new patents. This was over a century ago. And so I think we always think we're done. And right when we think we're done, there's a whole bunch more to discover.
So it's wrong for science to be dismissive of the UAP mystery.
Yes, I think that that's wrong, because you can't dismiss something without looking at the evidence and without being allowed to collect your own evidence and get more evidence. Because how can you dismiss something as nonsense before you're even giving people a chance to present the existing body of work?
Okay, so let's apply the scientific method to some examples. We're very interested in Arizona because it's been a hotspot for sightings of anomalous objects at times. There's been a spate of military pilots in particular in sensitive, restricted training areas reporting unusual objects doing extraordinary things, doing Mach 7.75, like very high speeds at very high altitude, 36,000 feet. And they're dismissed often as drones. Do you find the drone explanation very satisfying?
No, I don't, because we have these stories, except they're more than stories. They'll often have data, they'll have video of objects that are going faster than our drones are capable of than drones from other countries we know of, and at the wrong altitude above which we know drones have difficulty operating. So I don't think that explanation can make everything go away. I think it's a bit of a cop-out many times.
So let's set the scene in Arizona before we go to specific videos. What can you tell me about what characterises Arizona? Well, obviously there's the military training ranges, it's a huge military training area. Can you set the scene for us about these videos and put them in context with what else we know has been going on from the USS Nimitz episode and the training ranges across the United States? I'm particularly interested in the phenomenon of UFOs seen over the Palo Verde nuclear site in Arizona, over military training ranges. Set the scene for me. Paint me a picture of Arizona and why it's significant.
So we've got in the Arizona, we have, it's near Mexico, of course, so you have a lot of patrols, border security, and so you have opportunity to catch things. You've got the desert where you don't have, you've got rural areas, you've got desert areas where you're not going to have planes and drones. You may have military hardware. You know, as you pointed out, we have military test ranges. They're sort of set out far away from the city. But also you're going to have trained military pilots or Department of Homeland Security, border security, things like that, who know what the mundane objects look like and know also what U.S. military hardware look like. And in the middle of the night, they'll spot objects that don't conform to things that they normally see out there.
And the cool thing I think is really interesting is ever since the Nimitz incident, this new phased array radar that we have, a much better type of radar system. Are you able to speak to why that's different from what we know of the old types of radar?
So yeah, we're always advancing our technology where we have better position and speed resolution with our better technologies. And we use our new technologies both in radar as well as in infrared. We've also got forward-looking infrared, and we have all these technologies allow us to see beyond what the human eye can see. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why we have more UAP reports is not because, you know, we have software glitches, that's always the excuse, but rather I think we are enhancing what we can see beyond what just the human eye can see.
So we're seeing things that have probably been there all along.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
So let's go to some of these. An A-10 Warthog aircraft has this weird object hovering around it. What can you tell me about that?
It's so hard to tell from this one video what it is that we're seeing. But the thing is, videos don't just stand on their own. We also have the corroborating story of not just regular witnesses, but military people who are trained to identify foreign aircraft, and yet are seeing objects that sometimes trail them, buzz their plane, and they can't identify it. Their radar systems, their computer systems, they're designed to identify civilian aircraft, to identify Russian, Chinese, and other countries' hardware that they're flying around, and yet they're not able to identify some of these objects that are violating military airspace on a regular basis.
So there are huge airspaces in Arizona. There's the Luke Air Force Base, there's the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. They're major training areas for US fighter pilots, including the A-10 pilots. And there's training ranges adjacent to these that are absolutely massive. And what fascinates me is there's been a succession of reports that have come into the Federal Aviation Administration from pilots, from military pilots, raising concerns about objects that in one case has actually hit the plexiglass cockpit window of F-16. Are they drones? Could it just be that they're simply commercial drones?
I think that's very unlikely. First of all, it would be illegal to operate in military airspace, but some of the incidents, like this alleged mid-air collision, that is very serious, and that's going to be at an altitude that really most commercial, even military-grade drones are not going to be able to operate.
I mean, there's one here. April the 22nd, April 22, so April 2022, an F-35 pilot reports 8 silvery unidentified objects at 16,000 and 20,000 feet. I mean, they're concerned enough about it to report it to the Federal Aviation Administration. There's clearly something getting into training areas that's raising a concern among pilots.
That's right, something's going on, and we really have to ask ourselves, would a foreign country have the technology to see some of the behaviors and maneuvers we've been seeing, unusual high speeds and turns. If it is a country of human beings, is it Russia? Is it China? If so, why haven't they already overrun, Ukraine, Taiwan, etc.? It seems really implausible to chalk up every UAP to some human technology, to some foreign actor, violating U.S. airspace with impunity.
So let's talk about the A10 incident.
Yes.
Are you able to speak about this with any specificity? What conclusion can we come to about this case?
In this case, it's really hard to come to any conclusion because we've got the cameras clearly moving around, the planes moving around, and we just have a small collection of pixels. So it's extremely hard to judge if we've got something genuinely anomalous in this particular case.
I mean, it's tempting to conclude that that little object, whatever it is at the same distance from the camera as the aircraft. But we don't know that, do we?
We don't know that in this particular case. In many videos, it's hard to say when you only have one point of view. It's really hard to say if you've got a large object far away or a small object close up. And so that's always the challenge with these types of videos, is that we need more information, more of the metadata. It's good to combine video with radar and other information where possible. It's really hard for me to declare that this is something anomalous versus a bird or drone or a plane in this particular instance.
Okay, so La Bruja, the witch, it was captured in, I think, February 2020 using a mobile scope truck. So it's a truck on the ground using what looks like a FLIR imaging system. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there it is, whatever it is. What can you say about that?
Well, it's a very strange shape. I don't see any wings. I also don't see any propellant.
Couldn't it just be a balloon?
It could be, but I think if we checked the wind speed at the time in the area, I don't think that this is moving along with the wind. It's hard to just write this off as a balloon or cluster of balloons. And where did it come from here in the middle of the desert? It
seems to be moving under some kind of apparent control.
Yeah, or it could also be there's so much we don't understand still about the atmosphere, and that's another one of the reasons I'm so interested in UAP. Sometimes it's not necessarily technological craft of some sort, but there could also be atmospheric sprites and sorts of atmospheric phenomena that we don't understand when you've got, extreme differences in temperatures in different areas like in the desert.
Sure.
But whatever it is, I think it's worth figuring it out rather than being dismissive. I sometimes worry that we've lost our sense of wonder and curiosity. And I want to figure out what this is. Even if it is just a balloon, I want to know that.
Well, Rich Hoffman was telling us from SCU that back in the 1960s and 70s when he was doing work, he was actually working at times alongside US Air Force Project Blue Book investigators. The military was collaborating with civilian organizations to try and investigate the phenomenon.
Yes, and I think in this particular case, I believe the name means the witch. But that, I think, gives me an opportunity to say that I don't think that we're dealing with, in most cases at least, that I'm thinking about in terms of UAP, anything that's paranormal. To me, that word is abused, and paranormal is probably just a word for normal we haven't figured out yet. Anything exists is normal.
Yeah.
That's right. I think that we are dealing with something that can be studied. We can come up with hypotheses, and we can test our hypotheses with the scientific method.
Why is La Bruja potentially an anomalous object?
Well, we have an object here moving along at a steady clip in the desert, and it's got a shape that doesn't immediately seem to conform, given the resolution we have, at least of the video. It doesn't seem to conform to the shape of a drone or a plane or anything that should be out in the desert at that time, or anything of human manufacture. It doesn't quite have that shape.
Can we say if it's hot or cold here?
So most FLIR cameras have two different modes, where white, it could be very hot or it could mean very cold. So it's hard to say. In this particular video, we don't know what the exact mode is. It's either very, very hot or very, very cold. It's definitely very different than the temperature of the surrounding environment. So because the cows here are black, this suggests that the camera is in a mode where black is hot, which means that the potentially anomalous object here is very cold. And that's strange, because if it's an animal, it should be warm. It should be, even if it's cold-blooded, it's going to show up as warm.
And if it was a machine, you'd expect it to be hot as well.
Yes, because you'd expect some kind of exhaust or propellant. And so the temperature of this object, as well as its shape, suggests that this is something worth studying and trying to explain.
So potentially anomalous.
Exactly, because of the temperature and the shape.
So the rubber duck. We know that it was 2019 when it was caught. What can you tell me about the rubber duck? Why is it interesting scientifically?
Well, the temperature is unusual because we have here a situation where the camera is in the mode where white is not hot, but rather cold. And so that's unusual because if you have an animal, like a bird, for example, or a mammal, or even a cold-blooded animal, is typically going to show up as warmer, not colder than the environment.
So you'd expect it to be black if it was hot.
That's correct. So it's important to keep in mind that these cameras have two modes. And so that's why it's important to look at the metadata. And an analysis has been made by Peter Reali of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, the SCU. And in this particular video, in the mode that it's in at the shooting that we're looking at here, white is designated cold. And that's unusual because animals should be warm, and also technology would typically also be warm because you'd have some kind of exhaust.
And you don't see any kind of propulsion system here. It seems to be moving under speed.
That's right. And the only kind of thing that happened to is you could have a balloon or paper floating in the wind, but we can look up the day and time of this video. We have the metadata. The SCU has done this in their analysis, and this object is moving against the wind and is moving at velocities faster than the wind, which makes it unlikely to be a balloon.
Against the wind.
Against the wind.
Which implies it's got its own propulsion system.
That's right, but we don't see in the video sort of a hot trail that you'd see from an artificial system that has some sort of propulsion behind it.
Couldn't the apparent high speed we see here, though, just be a parallax effect because we know the aircraft or whatever it is that's filming it is moving as well?
Yes, so the speed is not unusual by being particularly high, but rather by being against the wind and higher than the wind.
Right.
So this is not a case where we can claim, a supersonic or hypersonic UAP or anything like that. But just because the speed isn't something enormous doesn't mean it's not anomalous. The temperature
if it was just a
anomalous.
balloon, I mean, the common thing is for people to say it's just a balloon. Mm-hmm. And if it was just a balloon, well, you'd be looking for evidence for where the wind is, and it's clearly going against the wind, so it's got some kind of propulsion system.
That's right. And so it's unlikely to be a balloon. And we need to keep in mind that the context of this video, that we have men and women who are trained to look for things like drug cartels doing smuggling and look for illegal immigrants doing border crossings. So they know they've surely encountered the detritus of balloons and other objects, and so clearly they have those control cases under their belts. Why would they mistake a mundane or prosaic object like that for something anomalous?
And the reason why this video was leaked is because they clearly felt it was anomalous.
Exactly. And so, of course, they're going to see balloons, and they're going to see drones, and they're going to see animals, they're going to see birds, and over time, the operators, people who work for border security and U.S. Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, why do we not trust that they get some modicum of training, surely, and they are going to recognize mundane and prosaic phenomena?
Why does this matter? Why do we need to know?
We need to know what's in our airspace and in the oceans and along the ground. Because if it's not American or American-made and someone or something is penetrating our airspace and violating our national borders with impunity, how can we not care about what that is?
So David Grush, the US Air Force whistleblower, has suggested that he's got evidence of a hidden retrieval program of non-human technology. We know that there have been allegations of retrievals of non-human craft in the Arizona area. Do you find it plausible that there could be a reverse engineering program underway? And do you think that what we're seeing here might explain some of this phenomena? Could there be some kind of black military program that we don't know about?
I do think that a black military program of a huge leap in technology is possible, but I'm skeptical of that explanation, probably even more of some of the more speculative ones. And it's because if the US had some of the amazing technology that we've seen some perhaps modicum of evidence of, if not in these videos and the Nimitz and all these famous cases, then if that's the case, why is the US not using this? Why have we lost wars? Why did we lose Afghanistan? Why did we lose Vietnam? Why aren't we secretly helping Ukraine with this? Why don't we use it? If you look at American history and history of any country, if you have a secret technology, you eventually use it.
Sure.
It's eventually known that you've got the U-2 spy plane, for example. So there's historical precedence for this.
But they did keep the U-2 spy plane very secret for very many years.
That's true. But with some of the maneuvers we see UAPs doing, you wouldn't need just one leap in technology. You'd need, frankly, several. And it just seems bizarre that we would have that. Now, you mentioned reverse engineering. Could there be some sort of non-human tech that we reverse engineer? Now, I'm really skeptical of this for several reasons. I think it's plausible. I do think that David Grush's claims need to be examined because it's plausible. But I wonder if there is an advanced civilization, why would they be crashing as often as is alleged? And I also think if there is a crash retrieval program, I doubt we would make any progress, because if there is some sort of intelligence greater than humans, they could be thousands, millions, they could be billions of years more advanced than us. We might not make any progress with that.
If there have been retrievals, the Kingman case from 1953, for example, involved allegedly the retrieval of 3 disc-shaped objects from the desert that were somehow retrieved allegedly by the US military and secreted away. Do you find it plausible, the possibility that there might be some kind of base, some kind of underground base in the region of Arizona that's being used to hide such technology and reverse engineer it?
Well, I think that we wouldn't make very much progress, as I said, in reverse engineering, because I think if there are technologies out there that are from some sort of non-human intelligence, they could be from another star system and way ahead of us. So I think it's plausible that there's an attempt at such a program, but I'm skeptical we've made any real progress.
How tight is the world that you're in of physics? I mean, you're talking about nuts and bolts physics.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people who are trained in nuts and bolts physics at universities all around the United States. If there was this kind of secret parallel program going on, don't you think we'd know about it? Wouldn't you know that physicist colleagues of yours had suddenly disappeared off and weren't accounted for what they're actually doing in their research?
Yes, and I think there's precedent for this. There's the Manhattan Project, for example. And so I think what's happening is, this is again why, even though it's plausible, I'm still a bit skeptical. Now, I think Grush is reporting what he's heard secondhand. He doesn't have the firsthand evidence himself. So I have no doubt, or very little doubt in my mind, that he is very sincere. But I'm still skeptical of a large-scale program, because how could you hide this from scientists? So I think one possibility, one very scary possibility, in my opinion, is they haven't hired enough scientists. And so the problem is that we're not making progress if there is such a program, because people like me and my colleagues are kept in the dark, which then reinforces the stigma and taboo, because, oh, there's no such program.
Because good science is about sharing ideas.
That's right.
And testing each other's theories.
Exactly. So I think that if the US government has a crash retrieval program, as has been alleged, I think if they want to make real progress, they're going to have to tone down the classification and allow more scientists to work on it, because they're not going to make real progress. If you look at historical examples like the Manhattan Project, if it had been only 10 scientists, we wouldn't have built the atomic bomb. We wouldn't have made progress as quickly as we did.
Locals in Sedona, the little town in Arizona, suggest that there's a weird activity going on. There are areas that are meant to be open public land where people have been confronted by men with guns dressed in paramilitary uniforms telling them to get out of the area or they will be killed. There's a suspicion in the local community that there is some kind of base adjacent to this little town in Arizona. And interestingly, it's not that far away from these training areas where these objects are being seen. Do you find it plausible that there could be a possible hidden base near the town of Sedona?
Well, there would need to be a money trail, a paper trail somehow. And if there is such a base, it's happening illegally without congressional oversight in the United States. And I think that's wrong. I think that we are potentially redirecting funds to secret projects that are not officially on the books. And people's rights are being violated. If they're being approached by people telling them to leave, but there's no signage, official signage that says an area has been, seized, for example, by eminent domain by the US government, then people have no right to tell people that. So I think it's plausible that we have black ops projects. That's probably more plausible than aliens or some other non-human intelligence. But then I wonder, why is the US not then using this great technology if we have these great new aircraft? Why aren't we using that in order to further the US's goals?
Maybe we're holding it back for the next confrontation with our potential foreign adversaries.
But then why are we not using our best pilots? Why do we have, Ryan Graves and we have Commander David Fravor talking about their encounters? Why are they the ones flying these things? It doesn't make sense. If it's artificially remote controlled, where are the remote control operators coming forward? Nobody has come forward and said, I was the pilot of the Tic Tac or the gimbal or the rubber duck.
What we do know is somebody is wanting to hide something in the barren wasteland just to the west of Sedona.
And what is that? I want to know.
Okay, so we don't know a huge amount about the circumstances of this video, but we do know that this particular object, the cigar, it was shot off a monitor in an aircraft in the same area as the rubber duck.
Well, this is very interesting because I don't see any wings or propellers, but it's very hard to judge because we're seeing a video of a video. And so it's going to make it extremely hard to come to any solid conclusions. But what's immediately strange is I don't see any traditional aerodynamic surfaces, and yet this thing seems to be moving along at a decent pace here. I do see what appears to be there could be some propellant, which would suggest it is some sort of more mundane human-made object, because if you look carefully, there does seem to be some sort of trail, but it's hard to tell whether that's a trail from, from propellant, from a propulsion system, or maybe it's just an artifact of the camera system where it's just an after image of where the object has been. So it's really hard to tell since we're looking here at a video of a video, so it's extremely hard to judge without more context and metadata of whether this is legitimately anomalous or not. But I'm intrigued.
It is an intriguing object, isn't it? There's no visible means of propulsion there.
I don't see any wings. And I can't tell if the trail behind it is propellant from a propulsion system or is it just after effect.
Could it be a missile of some kind?
If it is, who fired it? Is this a missile test? Could this be a missile test if it's in the same area in Arizona where we might have a military base, a testing range? But again, why is this being filmed then? Is this being considered anomalous by by whoever is filming it? Aren't the people filming it the ones who would know if there's a missile being launched?
I was about to say, if it was a missile test, what on earth was an aircraft doing in the area at the time?
Exactly. You would have rules about what can be in the air at the time.